Okay, welcome to the second part of the Theme B summary video. So moving on, we're going to talk now about how human life began. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it states that human beings in his image on day 6 of the 7 days of creation. The Bible also identifies Adam and Eve as the very first human beings. And according to the biblical text, God actually made Adam from the dust of the ground. So he created him, he crafted him, almost like a potter making something out of clay. God made Adam from the dust of the ground and then breathed life into him through his nostrils. In the story, it then says that God made Eve from one of Adam's ribs. Now, some Christians, who are known as fundamentalists, as we know, believe that these stories literally explain how human life began. However, other Christians, who take a more liberal approach, believe that the stories should not be seen as literally true, but rather as symbolic stories that have a deeper meaning. So they teach us that there is this special relationship between human beings and God. Now, what does science say about how human life began? Well, of course, we have Darwin's theory of evolution, and it can really be set out in those 5 bullet points there below. So first off, there's competition for food, and the young of every species have to compete for survival. Those that are able to thrive and survive tend to have favourable characteristics, so they tend to be stronger, more able to camouflage, that kind of thing. These characteristics are generally passed on by reproduction. Each generation, therefore, will gradually improve, and it will improve in its adaptation to its environment. And so that's how the species evolves, this constant process of improvement or adaptation. Linked with this, there's the theory that all related organisms are descended from a common ancestor, and that the earth itself is alive and evolving rather than being static and fixed. Now, when Darwin's theory was first published back in the 19th century, it was very controversial for many Christians because it kind of went against that biblical view that human beings have a special status, they're made in the image of God, because Darwin's theory suggests that we're just kind of the latest evolution of other previous species. Darwin's theory also challenged the idea that there is a purpose to creation, that God sits behind it, and that human life is special and sacred. As Darwin's theory suggested that humans had evolved from other species, it suggested that other species do have similar abilities to use reason and to have morals. And people had previously thought that only humans had that. And that had also some implications for Christian beliefs about how we should use and treat animals as well. Now, initially, representatives from the Anglican Church, the Church of England, were against Darwin's views. But many churchgoers were really impressed by the evidence and reasoning that he showed in his book, Origin of the Species. And so they actually came to the conclusion that science and religion were not incompatible. They found a way to kind of come to the conclusion that evolution was actually the method used by God in the process of his design. So Darwin's theory really triggered a wider debate about how the Bible stories should be interpreted, and whether stories like creation, the 7 days of creation, or the creation of Adam and Eve, the story of Noah, etc., whether they are meant to be seen as literally true or as stories that have a deeper significance, like a mythical significance. Remember that there are fundamentalist Christians who are called creationists that totally reject these scientific theories like Darwin's theory of evolution, because they believe the Bible provides the only explanation for how human life began. Now, you may want to pause the video now and have a go at this practice question here. So it's a 12 marker. Evolution proves that religious beliefs about the origins of life are wrong. Okay, moving on now to abortion. So we need to make sure we understand what abortion actually is and can define it. So abortion is the induced termination of a pregnancy to destroy the fetus. It's becoming increasingly common. Okay, so around 25% of all pregnancies ending in abortion between 2010 to 2014 is quite a high statistic. And there are approximately 50 million abortions globally each year, but that's just approximate because sometimes there's no tracking of these statistics. So abortion is legal in many countries, but actually not all countries. And some examples of countries where abortion is illegal are listed there. So Iraq, Malta, the Philippines are on the list. In the UK, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act back in 1991 really embedded in the law that there should be legal protection for the fetus after 24 weeks of development, because at that point it should be able to, with support, survive outside of the womb. That means that abortion is legal up to the 24th week of pregnancy if two doctors agree that the termination should take place. After that time, so after 24 weeks, an abortion can still be carried out if there is either a serious threat to the life of the mother or the fetus through scanning and monitoring is found to be severely disabled and unlikely to have any kind of decent quality of life. Now, ethical discussions and considerations around abortion often start with this question: when does human life begin? It's a really interesting one for you to ponder. When do you think a new human life begins? Is it the moment of conception, when the sperm fertilizes the egg? Is it right just as soon as the baby is born? When does a new human life actually begin? Now, the problem is that the embryo and then the fetus, as it develops, goes through this gradual process of development, and there is no clearly defined point at which it comes alive. All genetic material for the new person is present at the moment of conception. Now, this lack of agreement as to when human life begins leads to contrasting beliefs about if and when abortion should be acceptable. So in terms of some religious points of view about abortion, many Christians believe that abortion at any stage of pregnancy represents the intentional killing of an innocent life. And of course, that goes against the rule from the Ten Commandments in the Bible, which states, "You shall not kill." The Catholic Church in particular has a very strict view on abortion, teaches that abortion is always wrong. And church teaching, which is the catechism, clearly states that a unique human being exists from the very moment of conception, so from the moment that the sperm fertilizes the egg. Some Catholic teaching from the Pope, so in papal encyclical, it's a teaching that the Pope has written, states human life must be respected and protected from the moment of conception. From the first moment of its existence, a human being must be recognized as having the rights of a person. So there's some really important points there. Okay, so from the moment of conception, it's a human life from this point of view, and from that first moment, this human life should be recognized and given the rights that any kind of living human, if you like, would have. Now, in contrast to this view of the Catholic Church, however, many Protestant Christian churches argue that although abortion is usually wrong, there are some situations in which abortion should be allowed. These may include cases of rape, fetal abnormality, or of course the kind of most severe situation when the life of the mother is in danger due to her pregnancy. Now, Christians who argue this point may use Jesus' teachings, such as love one another and treat others as you would like to be treated, to support their view. And they would argue that abortion, in some very serious circumstances, may actually be the most loving thing to do. Now, Islamic teaching states that abortion is usually forbidden, so it's usually haram. But, however, abortion should be allowed in certain circumstances that are very serious, such as if a situation arises where a choice must be made over the life of the mother or the life of the child. Some Muslims also believe that abortion should be allowed if the fetus will be born with either physical or mental disabilities that are severe, or if the pregnancy came about as a result of rape. The Quran specifically states that it's wrong to kill a child for fear of being poor, and this is usually applied to the issue of abortion too. It states in the Quran, "Do not kill your children for fear of poverty. We shall provide for them and for you. Killing them is a great sin." Interestingly, there are some different points of view in Islam about when human life actually begins. So some Muslims believe a fetus receives its soul and actually begins life at 40 days after conception, whereas others believe this happens at 120 days. That has implications in terms of when an abortion should be or could be seen as acceptable. Okay, so here's a 4-marker that you can try to do. So you need 2 contrasting religious beliefs there about abortion. My top tip whenever you're writing about abortion is always to reference the Roman Catholic view, and they have a very strict view on abortion. And it's a really good one because you would be able to find other perspectives that will contrast with it. And here's a 12 marker as well. So abortion should be allowed only when the life of the mother is at risk. Just make sure that you're really engaging there with the specifics of the question and not just writing a kind of general for and against abortion answer. Okay, let's move on to euthanasia now. So euthanasia literally means a good death. And the aim of euthanasia is to intentionally end the life of someone who's in pain or has a poor quality of life as a result of a serious illness. So there are some different types of euthanasia. So there's voluntary euthanasia, non-voluntary euthanasia, active euthanasia, and passive euthanasia. Our main focus for our course is on voluntary euthanasia, when a person asks a doctor to end their life as they do not want to live anymore. So active euthanasia, so somebody asking a doctor to end their life by giving them an injection or some medicine, is illegal in the UK. However, a medical decision may be made to withhold treatment, e.g. like switch off a life support machine, if it's believed to be in the best interest of the patient, but that would normally be when somebody, well, it would always be if somebody is on like life support, they're in a coma, they're unable to make a decision for themselves. So it's quite different to active euthanasia. Now, some religious views on this. First of all, we start with the sanctity of life principle, which is the idea that human life is special to God. And that's really important to the Roman Catholic position on euthanasia, which was set out in a declaration on the subject in 1980. So this document defined euthanasia as an act or an omission which causes death in order that all suffering ends. The Catholic Church teaches that euthanasia is not allowed. Many Christians believe God has a special, unique plan for all human lives. It says in the Bible, "Before you were in the womb, I knew you." And they argue that this ending of a human life before it's naturally time for it to end through euthanasia goes against the will of God. Christians may also refer to the rule from the Ten Commandments, "You shall not kill," to argue against euthanasia. However, different Christian view, some Christians, particularly from within the Protestant group of Christians, such as the Church of England, for example, or the Quakers, would argue that euthanasia is a way for Jesus' teaching, "Love one another," to be put into action. They argue that if a person is suffering and in pain and they want to end their life, that the most loving thing is to really let them do that and to give them that agency to make that decision. Some Christians also argue that God has given people free will. He made humans in his image, and so they should be able to choose for themselves if they want to end their lives. This is a really clear contrast to the beliefs of Islam, which is always totally against any form of euthanasia. So Islam teaches all life is special and given by God, and so should always be valued and looked after. No person has a right to choose when they will die, only God. And this really is reiterated again and again in the Quran, where it states, "Do not take life which God has made sacred, and no soul may die except with God's permission." So euthanasia is haram, it's forbidden in Islam. It's considered to be a sin against God because God has a plan for each and every person, al-qadar, so predestination. And euthanasia goes against this plan. Now, in 2015, the UK government rejected plans for a right to die law, which would have allowed voluntary euthanasia for people with terminal illness. It followed a very passionate debate on the topic. So you can see this issue of euthanasia is really current at the moment. On the one hand, people have argued that a dignified and peaceful death should be allowed. But on the other hand, it was argued that if voluntary euthanasia was made legal, it might lead people with serious illnesses to feel that they should make the decision to die so that they are not a burden on their families and also on the NHS. So something to think about is that human life is recognised by most people as being valuable. Religious believers often refer to life as being a gift from God. However, there are different views on what it is that makes us human. As we saw in the debate on abortion, many believers would say that we are human from the time of our conception, whereas others might say we can only be considered human when we think and act as conscious human beings. Now, according to the first viewpoint, we are fully human whether we're embryos or comatose patients, whether we're immature or have suffered really serious damage. However, others may argue that a patient who's in a persistent vegetative state is unlikely to ever wake up, may be a human, but is not really a person. And so that's a really interesting distinction to think about. So if this view of what it means to be a person is taken to its logical conclusion, all sorts of people, including those with mental disabilities and people with paralysis, could also be considered as incomplete persons, and it could have serious implications in terms of the value that we give to people who live lives of difference. Now, many people who are against euthanasia argue that with correct care at the end of life, people can actually have a natural death that is good, and that therefore euthanasia does not need to be legalised in the UK. Now, hospices can provide this type of care for people. Hospices are all funded by public donations, and hospice care helps adults, young adults and children with all sorts of medical conditions. Now, the availability of hospice care is dependent on need rather than prognosis, and that means that people can use hospice care at any stage of their condition, not just at the very end of their lives. Now, final topic that we need to cover in terms of theme B is the beliefs about death and the afterlife, which we've also covered before within Islam and also Christianity. So there should be no brand new information here. Now, in terms of beliefs about death and the afterlife, atheists, people who reject the existence of God, and humanists would be an example of that, believe that there is no life after death. They don't believe that people survive after death, as they don't believe in a God who could make it happen. However, people who have a religious belief, Christian, Muslim, believe that death is not the end. This means that when they're reflecting on issues connected to death, like euthanasia, they're reassured that the life of each person will continue even after they die. Now, in terms of Christianity, Christianity teaches that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, Christians can also be resurrected, just like Jesus was, but we will be resurrected in our life after death in heaven. They believe this because Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life." And so for many Christians, death is not something to be afraid of. Christians have different views about whether the afterlife begins at the moment of death or at a future day of judgment when Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. This second point of view is actually stated clearly in the Apostles' Creed, which, remember, is a statement of Christian beliefs that dates back to around 400 CE. In the Apostles' Creed, it states, "He, Jesus, ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again to judge the living and the dead." Whether people will be judged at the moment of their death or at a future day of judgment, Christians all believe that it is God who will act as judge and determine the fate of each soul. So Christians believe that after death, God will judge whether a person will spend the afterlife in either heaven or hell. And in the parable of the sheep and the goats, it explains that this judgment will be based on how someone has lived their life on earth and whether they have helped people in need. This is a belief known as salvation through works. And a quote from the parable of the sheep and goats that supports this is below. "So come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat." And remember, it continues, "I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was sick and you visited me," etc. Now, in addition to the parable of the sheep and the goats, Jesus also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And from this teaching, many Christians believe that in addition to treating other people well, it's important to believe in Jesus and follow his teaching to achieve a good afterlife and earn a place in heaven. And this is an important belief that's known as salvation through faith. Now, heaven is traditionally seen as a place of being in the presence of God. And it is believed to be a place that will be free from pain and suffering, where there will be no more death. Heaven is believed by Christians to be returned to the perfect existence and relationship with God that Adam and Eve enjoyed before they disobeyed God. The book of Revelation in the Bible states about heaven, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Overall, heaven is seen as a place of pure happiness, and the Catholic Church teaching states, "Heaven is the ultimate end and fulfillment of the deepest human longing, the state of supreme definitive happiness." In Christianity, there are three main views on what is meant by hell. So firstly, eternal torment and punishment. People have rejected God and performed evil acts, and since God is just, he must punish them forever. And this view is supported in the Bible, where it states, "There will be much wailing and gnashing of teeth." However, some Christians argue that this view of hell does not fit with the belief that God is loving. While people may deserve to be punished for what they've done, this does not have to last forever. A second view on hell is the idea of a godless existence, that hell is just a state of loneliness and separation from those we love and God that is caused by sin. And thirdly, we have the cessation of existence. So hell is the end of life, it's total extinction, it's missing out on life after death with God. And in the Bible, the phrase the second death is sometimes used in conjunction with hell. A third perspective really on life after death, aside from heaven and hell, is purgatory, which is a specific Catholic Christian belief that the soul goes to a place of waiting to be purified before it's reunited with a resurrected body in order to see God face to face. So purgatory is believed to be a place of punishment or suffering, but it's different from hell because the suffering cleanses the soul and allows it to be made perfect for God. Now, Catholic Christians believe that if people on earth pray for those who have died, they can be free from purgatory more quickly. Many Christians reject the idea of purgatory, though, because it's not actually mentioned in the Bible.